Those who are new to the Dune franchise and have only seen Villeneuve's movies are more likely to be now diving into the books that these films are based on. And Dune Messiah in particular, now with the new adaptation. So we're all getting ready for it. But it's also very encouraging for various projects for adaptations when the actors and those involved, especially those that are the main characters that have a lot to do, get into that headspace, do the research, and read the books. I mean, it's not a requirement, obviously. And personally, I don't think that maybe everyone involved in the project needs to read the book before they dive into, but it is nice when the actors involved want to do that, to get into that headspace, to immerse themselves in the world of Frank Herbert's Duneverse, because there's just so much there that an adaptation can't get into, and a lot of subtext. And if you as an actor want to really get into the mind of the character that you're portraying, the books are just wealths of information. And it's always been encouraging that Timothée Chalamet in particular, I think he already read it even before he was ever signed on for the role, but he reread it, obviously, when he got involved in the project. And there's pictures of Timothée Chalamet reading Dune on the subways. I saw several shots of that, of him in different settings, of him reading the book. So that was always nice to see, because if anyone should read the book, it definitely should be Chalamet. So this is a picture. Secrets of Dune shared this. And I saw this picture going around, but he brought out that Timothée Chalamet was reading the French collector's edition of the novel. It looks like a ping pong table that the book is resting on, but I'm not sure. I know he's doing Marty Supreme, some sort of ping pong star movie. He is fluent in French, and he has French citizenship because of his father. I've heard him speak in French. He's definitely fluent. But that must be nice too for Denis Villeneuve, for him to speak in his first language. I'm sure that is nice for him to convey thoughts and ideas to someone who's already familiar with that language. So that's cool. It's always been nice to see, for fans especially, that the main characters or the actors playing these lead roles want to familiarize themselves with this universe, especially one that's so dense and that has to be streamlined or condensed in a way for a film format. And it leaves a lot of those details out for obvious reasons, for time-wise and everything. But, you know, you always hope that the actors will want to familiarize themselves deeply with the universe and with their characters too, because there's a lot of inner dialogue. Their thoughts are in the book, and those aren't really translated well. I mean, David Lynch did that. He chose to do that for his interpretation of Dune, to have that inner dialogue conveyed. A controversial choice. Some like it, some don't. But regardless, there's a lot going on in the minds of these characters, like Paul Atreides and Lady Jessica. One point of contention during Dune Part 1's coverage was that Rebecca Ferguson was seen posing with the book, and she kind of alluded to the fact that she had read it, but then she would make little mistakes. Like, she referred to Duke Leto as a king, and she praised how the screenwriters were adapting Lady Jessica. She just assumed that because it was written in the 60s that female characters just weren't given their full due, and she praised the screenwriters for how they were treating her character, and then proceeded to describe Lady Jessica as written. So that was kind of controversial there. And even when she went to do reshoots and stuff, she was seen posing with the book. But then later, she just came out and said that she hadn't read it. So yeah, just confirmed everyone's suspicions there. And it is a shame. I mean, Lady Jessica's character is one of the best written characters, I think, of Dune. She's definitely one of my favorites. And I think a character that, upon rereadings, there's more layers and more nuance there that you can relate to. A lot of people did read Dune when they were in their youth and maybe connected more with the journey of Paul Atreides, and that makes sense. But also, like, as you age, speaking of personal experience, upon rereading it, I found myself relating to different parts of the other characters' journeys, like Gurney Halleck and Lady Jessica, their feelings as all of these huge universe-changing events were unfolding. It was unfortunate that Rebecca Ferguson, she just couldn't get into it. And it's fine, just as long as you're not bad-mouthing the author just out of ignorance, because you just didn't know. But having that familiarity with the source material can make a difference in an actor's performance if they're coming at it from that informed place. And as long as the directors and writers, that's the most important thing. But it has to help from an actor's standpoint to really get into the mind of the character that they're portraying. And having that input and back and forth with the director can be very positive in the finished product of how any scene kind of plays out. an actor's input in that can be, extremely valuable. I think Ian McKellen affected his performance in The Lord of the Rings, not really the first time around, but when he returned for The Hobbit, he was familiar with that, and his input, because he knew how the book went, he wanted to try to incorporate some of the lines of dialogue as best as he could. That made sense. Even though he didn't start out very familiar with it the first time around filming The Lord of the Rings, he got familiar with it. He wanted to do that later. So out of all the characters, especially for Dune Messiah, Chalamet is the most important one, I would say, that needs to read it, because there is so much that's going on inside Paul Atreides' head. A lot of visions and seeing his reactions, seeing how he's dealing with that. I can't imagine not wanting to dive into the book and doing that research. It would seem that you're just scratching the surface just by going off of someone else's interpretation of the character and just seeing the screenplay of it. It just seems that you'd be missing out on so much depth that you can add to your performance with that knowledge of this character. And I would say even more so with Dune Messiah is Paul's just in his own head. So I'd say that this is extremely valuable and nice that he's ramping up just to be really refreshed. Having it just fresh in your mind definitely can't hurt. I'd say it's actually a good sign for the Messiah adaptation. And speaking of the performances, for those that did read the book, that we know did read Dune, I think I appreciated those performances more. I could tell that that was important to them. So I think Austin Butler, he came out and said that he had read Dune when he was 15, but that he reread it when he knew he was going to be meeting with Denis Villeneuve. I think he said he was doing it before they even had their little meeting for coffee to kind of see where everyone was. So yeah, he reread it. And he said he saw it through completely new eyes. And that's true. Yeah. Like I was saying before, I think especially with Dune, it just gets better upon subsequent rereadings. There really is so many layers to it. And you're doing so with like new information as you know how the story unfolds. But this time you're like diving in and really getting inside the characters and where they're being informed for where their journey ultimately leads to, seeing their motivations better in a new light. And Austin Butler's performance as Feyd-Rautha was great. I love that in Dune Part 2. Also, Oscar Isaac is familiar with the book, was familiar with Dune. That was nice to hear. And he was actually having to inform Rebecca Ferguson on some things. So that probably helped as she was preparing for her role in her scenes, especially their scenes together. And Oscar Isaac's Duke Leto is my favorite. Duke Leto. Loved it. I know there's just this thing where, well, we don't really need to force the actors to read something. It is a dense book and some people just can't get into it. I get it. But I mean, if you're an actor and you're signed on to this adaptation that is an iconic work of science fiction that is beloved by so many, why wouldn't you at least want to try or at least like listen to the audiobooks? But it is encouraging too to see Timothée Chalamet prepping for his role. So many more layers and so much depth added to Paul Atreides' journey at this point. So it's going to be very challenging, I'm sure. And he's definitely up for the challenge. He's one of those actors that really wants to give it his all and put in the work. So you have to admire his work ethic and his passion. And every time I hear him talking about Dune, which is funny because even when he was on the press tour promoting another film, which was a complete unknown, at every opportunity that he could, he brought up Frank Herbert and Dune, because that is the other film that he filmed that year that was up for consideration for several awards. But he was mostly just doing the tour for A Complete Unknown because obviously they thought that was what he was nominated for. So they were really trying to push the Oscar campaign for that role and his work on that. But it was nice that even in those moments, there were several moments where they're talking about Bob Dylan, but he still also tried to convey Frank Herbert and his themes of Dune, as there were similar things. Like Bob Dylan didn't want to be a savior figure. And when he brought up that, then he also brought up the warnings for Frank Herbert's Dune. So I did appreciate that even when he wasn't supposed to be talking about Dune, because that's not what the Oscar campaign called for, that he still tried to do that. So that was nice to hear. You know, I think this speaks to faithfulness to the source material moving forward with Dune Messiah, is the fact that we see Chalamet just again diving into this book, trying to get into that headspace. And I think it's an encouraging sign for what we can expect to see from this Dune Messiah adaptation, whether it will be true to the spirit, the main stepping stones in these characters' journeys. And I think that if it wasn't, I mean, what would be the point in reading the book then? At least from Chalamet's perspective, stepping into the role again as Paul Atreides, that's a good sign that his story will continue to be faithful. I mean, even with all the changes that were made in the first 2 films in the adaptation of Dune, the story of Paul Atreides, I thought, was very well done and very faithful, and especially to the most important theme that Frank Herbert, the author, was trying to convey. That was the most important thing to get right, and I thought that the films did that very well. So I'm hopeful that this most recent reread of Dune Messiah refreshes Chalamet and enables him to add more depth and nuance to his portrayal of Paul to really help convey the author's message with this particular story. And given Villeneuve's recent comments at the Saturn Awards about staying focused on conveying Frank Herbert's themes with this 3rd film, I can only assume that having a leading man in the role who has his own experience and perspective on what Herbert wrote for the character will only help to achieve that goal. But I'm curious to know what you think about this tease of Timothée Chalamet with the French edition of Dune Messiah. Do you agree that familiarity with the source material helps to enrich an actor's performance? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe for more Dune and other sci-fi and fantasy news, theories, and lore. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, you can leave a super thanks or join as a YouTube member for early access to new videos and other perks. You can also check out my Patreon page for exclusive content. Thank you all so much for your support, and as always, have a very nerdy day.